Olivia Bennett anticipated a standard journey on Flight DL1 986 from Atlanta to Washington, D.C. that Monday morning. Her mind was singularly focused on refining her keynote address for the year's preeminent national business conference, a speech she, as the celebrated CEO of a leading global tech conglomerate, was meticulously preparing for. Walking confidently down the jetway, her sleek carry-on in tow, Olivia's expression was composed yet thoughtful. The first-class cabin, with its spacious, leather-trimmed seats, bathed in soft overhead lights, initially promised the quiet preparation she sought. However, the moment she reached Seat 2A, the very seat she had meticulously reserved days prior, the atmosphere shifted as if an invisible current charged the air. There, lounging with an arrogant grin, was Thomas Walker, a white man in his early 40s, his blonde hair immaculately styled, his designer suit flawless. He sat with legs crossed, a self-satisfied smirk on his face, casually swirling and sipping an expensive wine, seemingly oblivious to anyone around him. His eye flicked over Olivia with palpable contempt. "Ma'am," he sneered coldly, without bothering to look up. "This isn't your seat. Coach is back there." Olivia's voice, calm but unyielding, cut through the insult. "Excuse me, sir. You're in the wrong seat. This is seat 2A, and I reserved it." Thomas slowly looked up, his gaze icy and mocking, as though her simple statement were an outrageous offense. After an uncomfortable beat, he delivered his hateful verdict, loud enough for all to hear. "Ma'am, this cabin isn't for people like you. Head back to coach." He then waved a dismissive hand, as though her very presence were a nuisance unworthy of his attention. Around them, first-class passengers abruptly paused their conversations, holding their breath, staring in stunned curiosity. Executives and leaders exchanged awkward glances. At the first-class entrance, a young flight attendant froze, her face a mask of embarrassment and indecision, glancing at Olivia with pity, but daring not to move forward. The hush that fell over the cabin felt like a silent scream against injustice. In that suspended moment, Olivia felt every gaze, some sympathetic, some curious, some laced with suppressed bias. Her heart raced, but she refused to let anger or hurt shatter her poise and dignity. Olivia didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. Instead, she took a steadying breath and quietly made a phone call, one that would change everything. Taking a steadying breath, Olivia lifted her chin, refusing to let anger or hurt shatter her poise and dignity. She smoothly pulled her phone from her jacket pocket, deciding then and there that this confrontation would not escalate into a public spectacle. She had faced prejudice before, and this time she would not back down. "All right," she whispered to herself, calm yet resolute, as she prepared to dial the one number she knew would handle the situation discreetly but decisively. The oppressive atmosphere seemed to freeze solid after Thomas's arrogant challenge. Yet Olivia stood there, spine straight and unwavering, her gaze unnervingly calm. In that tense moment, instead of arguing or raising her voice, she repeated once more, clear and controlled, "This is my seat." Thomas only curled his lip, his eyes still fixed on the wine glass in his hand, as if Olivia were air, something unworthy of his notice. Every subtle movement he made radiated disdain and authority. To him, Olivia was a mere nuisance, an annoyance not worth his concern. Passengers around began to murmur. Whispers swelled into clear chatter. A few discreetly watched, and someone even lifted a phone to record in silence. A middle-aged woman in a smart navy blazer a few rows away turned to her husband and whispered, "Did you hear how he spoke to her? That was disgusting." Her husband shrugged, avoiding his wife's gaze, embarrassed but not bold enough to speak. No one dared intervene openly, yet everyone understood they had just witnessed a blatant insult. Sensing all eyes on him, Thomas deliberately took another long sip of wine, as though to announce to the entire cabin that he couldn't care less about anyone's feelings, especially those of the woman before him. For Thomas Walker, wielding power and status to intimidate others was second nature, a game he never lost. Olivia inhaled deeply, refusing to let anger dictate her next move. She knew any loss of composure would become fodder for those already harboring bias. Instead, her hand completely steady, she calmly opened her phone, scrolled through her contacts, and selected the familiar name of her trusted assistant, Emily Harris. "Emily?" Olivia said softly, her tone both polite and authoritative. "I'm on Flight DL1 1986 to Washington, D.C. Someone's in my seat and refuses to move. I don't want to make a scene, but please handle this right away. Thank you." She slipped her phone back into her pocket, eyes fixed straight ahead. She didn't look at Thomas, but stood close enough for him to feel her determined presence. The cabin fell back into a tense silence, and within that confined space, Olivia Bennett stood tall and proud, ready for whatever came next. She understood that what happened from this moment on would be about more than a seat. It would be a stand for respect, fairness, and human dignity. And everyone on that flight held their breath, waiting to see how Olivia would respond to Thomas Walker's public insult. Finally, a young flight attendant. Finally, a young flight attendant nearby gathered courage and stepped forward, her voice trembling yet courteous. "Mr. Walker, there seems to be a mix-up. Could you please check your boarding pass again?" Thomas shot her a look of pure irritation and replied icily, each word a sting. "I'm not mistaken. Check again. I'm a platinum member. I always sit here." While Olivia stood firm like a statue of self-respect and dignity, Thomas Walker continued to flaunt his indifference in small but deliberate provocations. He gently rattled his wine glass, producing a steady, irritating clink, as if to remind everyone that he couldn't care less about the growing whispers around him. His eyes swept the cabin, broadcasting to all that the gossip rolling through first class was of no consequence to him. Olivia remained silent, her outward calm masking the fierce resolve within. In her mind flickered images of crucial board meetings, million-dollar deals, and the countless times she'd confronted those who underestimated a black female CEO. This wasn't just about a seat. It was part of an ongoing struggle for respect and fairness she faced every day. Her eyes hardened with resolve. She wouldn't argue, explain, or prove herself. She knew true power lay not in shouting, but in quiet, steadfast action. First class, once hushed and elegant, had become tense and uneasy. The other passengers, executives, entrepreneurs, and senior experts en route to Washington for critical meetings, seemed to lack the courage to openly challenge Thomas's arrogance. Instead, they exchanged embarrassed glances, their soft voices rising like a hidden current beneath the cabin's calm surface. A middle-aged woman nearby, wearing a navy blazer and a tasteful pearl necklace, leaned toward her husband and murmured anxiously, "Did you hear how he talked to her? It was so uncivilized." He swallowed hard, his face reddening with shame, but he couldn't bring himself to speak. He averted his eyes and pretended to study the travel magazine in his lap. An unspoken compromise. They knew what was right, but weren't brave enough to defend it. A couple of rows back, two young professionals in conservative business attire recognized the gravity of the moment. They discreetly pulled out their phones and filmed every second, their expressions serious and focused. They understood that this wasn't merely an onboard spat. It was a flashpoint that could explode across social media. Meanwhile, Thomas Walker lounged, utterly unfazed by the weight pressing down on the cabin. To him, power wasn't just something he possessed, it was something he expected others to acknowledge. He lived in a world that privileged him for his status and skin color. And moments like this were his adrenaline, proof that he remained in absolute control. And now everyone in first class, including Thomas Walker, would have to wait and see how Olivia resolved this. With dignity, composure, and unshakable determination. Another young flight attendant, braver than the first, stepped forward. Another young flight attendant, braver than the first, stepped forward. Her voice trembled slightly, but remained firm. "Sir, could I please see your boarding pass again? We need to confirm your seat assignment." Thomas looked at her with a cold, piercing stare, then curled a lip in challenge. "Do you even know who I am? I fly this route every week. Your system must be wrong. I always sit here." He spoke just loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear, sending a clear message. His power and privilege outweighed any attempt at verification by the crew. The tension ratcheted higher as the attendant glanced at Olivia with apologetic eyes. Olivia gave her a small, encouraging nod. She showed no impatience or anger. In her mind, each passing second revealed Thomas's true nature. A bully who weaponized his privilege to domineer others. First class had become a makeshift stage where every gaze and emotion centered on the two protagonists. On one side, Olivia Bennett, an astonishingly composed CEO. On the other, Thomas Walker, a wealthy man whose arrogance and prejudice couldn't be concealed. The young professionals continued filming, knowing that in just minutes these clips would stand as undeniable evidence of a pervasive injustice. Thomas may not realize it, but with every dismissive glance and condescending word, he was digging himself into a deeper hole, provoking a powerful backlash from those who had stood silent for so long. Olivia remained upright, her eyes calm, but unwaveringly strong, fixed on the path ahead. She understood that sometimes real change begins with determined silence, not as submission, but as a demonstration of unshakable strength that forces people like Thomas Walker to confront their own pettiness and error. And everyone on that flight waited with bated breath for the next moment when the tension would finally break and justice would be delivered unmistakably and decisively. As the tension in first class reached its peak, a figure emerged from the cockpit and strode into the cabin with an air of authority that immediately commanded everyone's attention. It was Captain Marcus Reed, a tall black man with over 30 years of aviation experience, renowned for his unwavering professionalism and his ability to handle crises with ice-cold calm. At his side were two flight attendants and an airport security officer. Their entrance was quiet, but unmistakable. This was no longer a simple seating mix-up, but a serious matter demanding immediate resolution. Marcus's gaze swept over Olivia briefly, filled with empathy, then locked onto Thomas Walker without hesitation. His voice rang out, clear and authoritative, shattering the stressed silence that had gripped the cabin moments before. "Sir, please, present your boarding pass." Thomas scowled, his arrogance now tinged with surprise and indignation. He could not believe a pilot was stepping in. To him, Marcus's intervention felt like a direct challenge to the power and status he thought he held. "Excuse me?" Thomas snapped, his tone louder and more confrontational. Don't you know who I am? I'm a platinum VIP customer on this airline. I sit here every week. You need to fix your system, not me." Marcus remained unmoved, his expression steady. He was too familiar with people like Thomas, those who believed money or influence placed them above the rules and entitled them to treat others with contempt. But Captain Marcus Reed had never bowed to anyone's rank or wealth. To him, safety and fairness always came first. "Mr. Walker," Marcus said evenly, each word deliberate and weighty, "this isn't a personal request. It's a flight safety protocol. We must verify your seat assignment to ensure the safety of this flight and all passengers. Please cooperate." Thomas's face flushed with anger, his hand trembling with fury, but he still refused to produce his boarding pass, as if doing so would be a humiliating surrender. "I told you!" Thomas shouted, his voice echoing through the cabin. "I sit here every week. Now you want me to prove it? Do you seriously expect me to give up this seat for someone like her?" Marcus did not flinch. A veteran of countless in-flight emergencies, he knew the importance of firm resolve. This was more than his duty as captain. It was his moral obligation as a black man who understood the sting of disrespect and the weight of unjust prejudice. "Mr. Walker," Marcus repeated calmly, "I do not wish to argue, but if you refuse to comply, we will have to take stronger measures. This is your final chance to cooperate peacefully." First class fell into an absolute hush after Marcus's words. Every eye turned to Thomas, waiting for his next move. Some passengers visibly relaxed at the crew's decisive intervention. Others watched with bated breath as the drama intensified. Cornered and enraged, Thomas's features twisted in righteous fury. To him, yielding now would be an unbearable disgrace. His deep-seated prejudices and inflated ego were on full display for everyone to see. He knew that any concession would shatter the image of power he'd so carefully constructed. Marcus held his ground, unwavering. The entire cabin seemed to hold its breath, awaiting how this powerful man would react under pressure from the flight crew. In that pivotal moment, everyone realized this wasn't just a quarrel over a seat. It was a deeper struggle between privilege and principle, between arrogance and justice, between baseless entitlement and the strength of dignity and truth. Olivia, silent but watchful from the start, took a steadying breath, silently grateful for Captain Marcus Reed's timely and commanding presence. Yet she also knew the ordeal was far from over. The tension in first class reached its breaking point after Captain Marcus Reed's firm warning. Thomas Walker, still lounging arrogantly, let out a mocking, contemptuous laugh, as if everything he just heard were the most outrageous joke of his life. "You're going to kick me off this plane just because of someone like her?" Thomas snapped loudly, deliberately emphasizing someone like her, with a look of pure disdain. His face dripped with sarcasm, blue eyes fixed on Olivia as if she alone were to blame for the chaos. Immediately, every eye in first class turned to Captain Reed, awaiting his response. The captain stood tall, shoulders squared in his crisp uniform, utterly unfazed by Thomas's provocation. His voice was low, but carried clearly through the cabin. "Mr. Walker, let me be perfectly clear. This flight will not depart until every passenger is seated in the spot they reserved. This isn't personal. This is about safety and respect For everyone on board. Today. Marcus's words rang like a decree. Yet Thomas's scorn only deepened. He tilted his head, face flushed with anger and the sting of challenge. Captain Reed recognized the pivotal moment. He took a single step forward, not to threaten, but to underscore what he'd say next. Perhaps you don't fully understand, Mr. Walker. Miss Olivia Bennett is not just any first-class passenger. She is the CEO of Bennett Tech Solutions, one of our airline's largest strategic partners. Your refusal to vacate the seat she reserved isn't a minor personal matter. It's a sign of disrespect to a very important customer. Reed's revelation struck Thomas like a wave, crashing against his pride. His face went pale, the arrogance draining from his eyes as panic flickered behind them. In that instant, the confidence and superiority he'd clung to fell away before the watchful eyes of every passenger. First class fell into a profound silence, so deep you could hear the hum of the air conditioning, and the collective held breaths of those on board. Passengers who had earlier exchanged uneasy glances now stared at Thomas with curiosity, reproach, and a hint of satisfaction at seeing him finally unmasked. Thomas Walker struggled to regain his composure, but failed. His hand trembled as he gripped the armrest, as if trying to reclaim the power that had just been cruelly stripped away. He had never imagined a pilot's single statement could make him feel so small. Deep down, he knew his fight was lost, and that realization filled him with seething anger. This is absurd, Thomas stammered, desperately seeking an excuse. But when he noticed every passenger's eyes fixed on him, his once powerful defenses crumbled into meaningless fragments. He could hardly believe he'd been so thoroughly humiliated. And what infuriated him most was that he'd led himself into this trap. Olivia remained silent, showing no hint of triumph. She simply turned her grateful eyes toward Captain Reed, understanding that his words had done more than defend her. They had delivered a clear message about justice, respect, and equality for all. Captain Reed stood his ground, the very picture of composed leadership after countless in-flight crises. He waited quietly for Thomas's next move, ready to take whatever steps necessary to uphold fairness and safety on his watch. Every passenger held their breath, wondering whether Thomas would reluctantly yield and slip away, or stubbornly insist on pushing the matter further. They all understood that what happened next would decide more than a seat assignment. It would reaffirm the core values of dignity and integrity in our modern society. The thick silence in the cabin was shattered by the firm footfalls of two security officers approaching. Captain Marcus Reed stepped back slightly, maintaining his calm, authoritative posture, as if to signal that he had fulfilled his role, and now those with proper authority would take over. Thomas Walker sat frozen, his eyes darting between the two officers, panic and suppressed rage evident on his ashen face. The officers stood tall, radiating professionalism. One spoke in a measured but unmistakably weighty tone. Mr. Walker, you may leave the aircraft peacefully of your own accord, or we will have to escort you off. The choice is yours. Thomas pressed his lips together, shame and fury flooding him. He had always believed his status and power rendered him untouchable, a shield against consequences. But in that moment, he realized no one was above the law or basic human decency. Worse still, the person who had forced him to pay for his behavior was Olivia, the same woman he had scorned from the start. Without another word, Thomas sprang up angrily and shoved his seat back so forcefully it banged into the row ahead. Nearby, passengers jumped back in alarm, their eyes a mixture of concern and outrage. Thomas hastily gathered his belongings, his hands shaking with rage and loss of control. Each clumsy, aggressive motion stood in stark contrast to the arrogant composure he displayed earlier. As he passed Olivia, he dared not meet her gaze. Doing so would only deepen his humiliation. Instead, he ground out bitter words under his breath, just loud enough for her to hear, but too quiet for most others. You think you've won? People like you are only a fad. Olivia did not respond. No look, no word. She simply remained composed, her expression reflecting the steadiness and authority of someone far more experienced in navigating such trials. Her silence sent the strongest message possible. She would not be shaken by the pettiness or hate of the man who had just stormed by. Most passengers watched the scene unfold, their eyes filled with admiration and sympathy for Olivia. A few nodded subtly in approval, while others wore looks of embarrassed shame at Thomas Walker's behavior. Clearly, Olivia's dignified calm had made a powerful impression on everyone present. Thomas continued down the aisle, each step heavier than the last. The two officers followed closely, ready to intervene if he attempted anything further. With each footstep, the cabin's tension eased. Passengers exhaled in relief, comforted that the injustice had been dealt with firmly and appropriately. At the upper far end of first class, one young traveler discreetly raised a phone and filmed Thomas's escorted exit. They knew this footage would spread quickly, not just to document today's incident, but to send a broader message about justice and respect in modern society. Captain Marcus Reed turned to Olivia, his eyes full of genuine empathy. He gave a slight nod, a silent apology for the undue disruption she'd endured. Olivia offered a gentle smile in return, showing her gratitude for his decisive and rightful handling of the situation. With a soft click, the cabin door closed behind Thomas, marking the end of a tense, emotional confrontation. The moment the cabin door clicked shut behind Thomas, a wave of relief, still tinged with gravity, washed over first class. Olivia exhaled gently, all too aware of the discreet glances now fixed on her, eyes filled with respect and admiration. Yet even as she'd rightfully reclaimed her seat, she couldn't shake the lingering sting of the prejudice she'd endured. Quietly straightening her posture, Olivia felt Captain Marcus Reed approach. His usual stern gaze had softened, conveying deep empathy and respect. Lowering himself to her eye level, a rare and humble gesture from such a seasoned pilot, he spoke in a low, sincere voice. "I'm truly sorry for what you just experienced. I have 2 daughters studying law, and I hope they learn to carry themselves with the same dignity and self-respect you've shown today." Though simple, Marcus's words carried profound weight, coming from a man who'd witnessed and understood the injustices people of color face every day. It was more than an apology. It was a heartfelt expression of solidarity and admiration. Olivia offered a polite smile, her eyes softening. She recognized that his apology sprang not just from duty, but from genuine compassion as a father guiding his daughters through a challenging world. She replied calmly yet firmly, each word underscoring her strength and self-worth. "I only wanted what I paid for and what I deserved." There was no blame, no anger, just a powerful assertion of her value. Marcus nodded gratefully, affirming his deep respect for her stance. Having offered his apology, Captain Reed straightened and turned back toward the cockpit, his confident, composed stride leaving a strong impression on everyone in the cabin. They realized they'd witnessed not only a firm resolution, but a defense of core values by the very captain responsible for their safety. First, class returned to a serene quiet without the earlier tension. Olivia slowly sat back down, quietly adjusting her seatbelt, her poise and composure unchanged. In her heart, she knew this was more than a personal victory. It was another small advance in the ongoing fight against prejudice and injustice present in society every day. Every passenger on that flight now understood a vital truth. No one, however wealthy or powerful, is exempt from the fundamental values of fairness and mutual respect. And that was the most profound lesson Olivia Bennett had just taught everyone through the proud, unshakable silence of her own dignity. Instead, a deep respect lingered for Olivia, who'd stood with unwavering dignity, and for Captain Reed, whose courageous and humane leadership had righted the situation. Leaning back in her seat, Olivia gazed out the window at drifting clouds, each one echoing the swirl of thoughts in her mind. She understood that today's events wouldn't simply fade away. Some would champion her, others empathize deeply, and some would still criticize or judge. But for Olivia, the crucial truth remained. She had stood firm and preserved her dignity. In that tranquil moment, passengers exchanged sympathetic glances as if sharing a collective lesson in self-respect and fairness. Some offered discreet smiles, satisfied by the crew's strong, fair handling of the crisis. Others sighed softly, wondering if they could have kept such composure themselves. A young woman who discreetly filmed the incident set her phone aside, her eyes shining with emotion. She knew this story would spread, not only to honor Olivia's dignity, but to remind society of the values so easily forgotten. And as the aircraft began its slow taxi toward the runway, Olivia reflected that today's ordeal was more than a minor injustice. It had become a vivid testament to the power of steadfast silence, of dignity, and above all, of the idea that everyone deserves respect for their efforts and contributions. Closing her eyes for a moment, she felt relief and renewed strength with every breath. Olivia Bennett knew that from this day forward her story would reach far beyond this small cabin, becoming a powerful message about dignity, justice, and resilience she would always champion. The cabin's heavy silence broke as the plane gently lifted off, leaving behind drifting white clouds like a soft reassurance. But Olivia couldn't yet know that the story from that flight wouldn't end when the cabin door closed behind Thomas Walker. Instead, it was just beginning to spread beyond the confines of that small cabin and quickly become a matter of public attention. No sooner had the plane left the ground than a 1-minute video capturing the entire incident was posted to social media. A young female passenger seated behind had filmed every tense moment between Olivia and Thomas, from his hateful remarks to her calm response, and finally, Captain Marcus Reed's decisive intervention. Within an hour, the video went viral on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and countless other platforms. Hashtags like Respect Olivia and No Room for Racism shot to the top of the trending lists, drawing millions of shares, comments, and reactions worldwide. Major news outlets, CNN, NBC, Fox News, and even respected business publications such as Forbes and the Wall Street Journal immediately covered the story, calling it a defining example of racial and gender discrimination in a professional environment. Viewers expressed outrage at Thomas Walker's arrogance and bigotry. His cruel words were replayed and dissected, painting a vivid portrait of a powerful man lacking basic civility. People quickly dug up and circulated information about Thomas, his employer, past statements and prior behavior, highlighting his long-standing pattern of domineering prejudice. In contrast, Olivia Bennett's composure, courtesy, and dignity earned her overwhelming praise. Thousands of comments applauded her steadfastness and restraint. A prominent attorney tweeted, "Olivia Bennett has shown that in the face of injustice, calm dignity is the greatest power," earning over 1 million likes and tens of thousands of retweets. Business leaders, activists, and celebrities also voiced strong support for Olivia. Sheryl Sandberg, Meta's COO, published a heartfelt post on LinkedIn hailing Olivia's actions as the epitome of true leadership, a woman who dared to stand up for her rightful place without losing her composure. Yet alongside the praise came criticism from those who accused Olivia of making a scene or dismissed it as just a small misunderstanding. Some even questioned why she hadn't simply taken another seat, inadvertently exposing the deep-seated expectation that women and people of color should always yield to avoid conflict. What gave the story even greater depth was the widespread recognition of Captain Marcus Reed's intervention. He was lauded not only for his role in de-escalating the situation, but for embodying integrity and justice. The U.S. Pilots Association issued an open letter. Captain Marcus Reed exemplified the ideal airline captain, not only ensuring flight safety but upholding every passenger's dignity and rights. In the days that followed, Olivia received hundreds of interview requests from TV networks, newspapers, and podcasts. Yet she remained humble and measured, agreeing to only a select few interviews to amplify a positive message about justice and respect. Meanwhile, public pressure forced Thomas Walker's company to issue an official statement, expressing deep disappointment in his conduct and announcing a serious internal investigation. The authority and reputation Thomas had spent years building were suddenly in jeopardy. Olivia's flight to Washington continued peacefully and with courtesy, but on the ground, her story had truly exploded, creating waves that compelled society to confront the prejudice and injustice simmering in daily life. Olivia was no longer merely a CEO. She had become a living symbol of resilience, dignity, and the ongoing struggle for justice that everyone deserves. When the story of Flight DL1 blew up on social media and in the press, the airline immediately came under enormous pressure. Its leadership, long celebrated for professional service and a sterling reputation, knew they had to act swiftly, decisively, and transparently to safeguard the brand amid an unprecedented public outcry. That same evening, just hours after Olivia's flight landed at Dulles International Airport, the airline's CEO, Richard Anderson, personally signed an official statement issued across all corporate channels. In strong, unambiguous language, it took full responsibility and offered the deepest apology to Olivia Bennett and every passenger on that flight. Our airline does not tolerate any form of racial or gender discrimination or prejudice. We deeply regret and sincerely apologize to Miss Olivia Bennett for the negative experience and injustice she endured on Flight DL1 This conduct is wholly inconsistent with the core values we uphold and are committed to defending. Beyond issuing an apology, the airline swiftly imposed stern sanctions on Thomas Walker. In a rare but unmistakably deterrent move, they suspended his travel privileges on all flights for 1 year and permanently revoked his platinum membership benefits. This public decision underscored that no amount of status can excuse insulting others, no matter who you are. Shortly thereafter, CEO Richard Anderson called Olivia Bennett personally in a private, heartfelt conversation. Known for staying out of headlines, Anderson expressed genuine contrition. "Miss Bennett, I want to personally apologize for what happened. I've watched the video multiple times, and I'm deeply impressed by how you handled yourself. We don't want to stop at an apology. We hope you'll help us drive real, meaningful improvements." He then invited Olivia to join a newly formed advisory council charged with overhauling the airline's employee training, management practices, and protocols for addressing future incidents of discrimination. This was no mere symbolic gesture. It was a concrete step toward systemic change. Although taken aback by the airline's prompt and positive response, Olivia listened calmly and appreciated Anderson's sincerity. Yet she knew this was only the beginning. Genuine improvement would demand sustained concrete actions rather than promises made in the heat of public scrutiny. Meanwhile, Thomas Walker faced consequences far beyond anything he'd expected. As news of his suspension spread, he found himself isolated at work and online. Former colleagues, partners, and clients avoided him, their expressions wary. His own company's leadership, under intense public pressure, convened an emergency meeting to reassess his role and conduct. Deep down, Thomas felt bitter and outraged to realize that the very power and privileges he'd long considered untouchable could be stripped away so swiftly. For the first time, he confronted a harsh truth. Power is not absolute, and every action has repercussions. At the same time, the airline moved quickly to enact a broad reform plan. Senior staff were mandated to attend diversity, equity, and anti-bias training. Anderson directed every department to review and strengthen their complaint handling procedures, ensuring that no incident like DL1 986 would ever recur. By that evening, millions applauded the airline's transparent, decisive response. Observers commented, "This is exactly how leading companies should uphold ethical values and foster a more just society." For Olivia Bennett, while she knew societal change doesn't happen overnight, she felt reassured. She recognized that this incident was more than a single injustice. It was the catalyst for a larger, more meaningful transformation, one in which she had unexpectedly become a central figure. Olivia, resolved to partner with the airline and the broader community to turn today's promises into tomorrow's reality. Though pleased with the airline's swift response and CEO Richard Anderson's well-intentioned commitments, Olivia Bennett understood full well that apologies, no matter how heartfelt, were only the first step in a long journey. She resolved not to let this incident end with a few public statements or superficial changes on paper. In Olivia's mind, the fight needed root and branch reform, so that no other passenger, especially women and people of color, would ever have to endure what she had just gone through. A few days later, Olivia met privately with the airline's senior leadership and laid out her firm, responsible stance. She spoke without anger, yet every word and recommendation carried the persuasive force of her experience and vision as a major corporate leader. "Heartfelt apologies are necessary," she began in a calm but resolute tone, her eyes sharp and confident. But we all must understand that saying sorry isn't enough. What matters most is a commitment to systemic change. I want to see comprehensive anti-bias and anti-discrimination training rolled out not just for frontline staff, but for senior management who ultimately shape corporate culture. Olivia then proposed concrete measures. She stressed the critical need for independent, anonymous reporting channels so employees and passengers could flag discriminatory behavior immediately without fear of retaliation. She also insisted on clear enforced penalties for any proven misconduct. Throughout the meeting, Richard Anderson and the rest of the leadership team listened intently. They recognized that this was no longer a minor issue, but a matter of survival for the airline's reputation and future. Olivia didn't merely demand verbal commitments. She required a specific time-bound action plan to track progress. "I'm not interested in lip service," she stated plainly. "I need transparent accountability. Real change happens only when everyone understands that discrimination in any form will never be tolerated under any circumstances for any reason." The leadership wholeheartedly endorsed Olivia's proposals, not only due to public pressure, but because they recognized the wisdom and morality of her demands. Anderson pledged that Olivia's recommendations would begin immediately with regular public progress reports. As Olivia pushed for these strategic long-term reforms, Thomas Walker's situation grew ever more precarious. Beyond losing his flight privileges and platinum status, he faced mounting pressure from both the public and his own company. Internal meetings were convened to reassess his fitness for his role, forcing him to confront, perhaps for the first time, the real-world costs of abusing his privilege. Bitter and angry, Thomas clung to a sense of injustice, unwilling to see that his own actions had provoked this uproar and jeopardized his career. Yet deep down he began to face an undeniable truth. Power and privilege do not shield anyone from the consequences of irresponsible, unethical behavior. Meanwhile, Olivia deliberately maintained distance from the media frenzy, politely declining high-profile interviews or television appearances designed to turn her into a short-lived icon. When bombarded with requests, she consistently replied, "I don't want to be a symbol. I'm not interested in fame for its own sake. What I truly want is to use this opportunity to drive real, lasting change, to protect the rights and dignity of everyone, not just myself." Her stance earned her profound respect. Rather than being viewed as a victim, she emerged as a leader of a movement demanding genuine internal reform, someone whose actions aligned with her words. Olivia knew that shifting societal attitudes wasn't a sprint, but a marathon of persistence and dedication. She was determined to remain steadfast on that path, not only to defend her own rights, but to stand for all those who quietly endure injustice every day. For Olivia, this was no longer just an incident on a plane. It had become a pivotal moment, a wake-up call for both herself and the community, one she would transform into a powerful catalyst for meaningful, enduring social change. When Olivia steadfastly pursued deep, meaningful change and declined to become a media symbol, she had no idea that her decision would only make her story more powerful and far-reaching than ever before. She didn't set out to be a hero, but her unwavering conviction, clarity of purpose, and authenticity resonated with thousands of others who had silently endured injustice every day without ever speaking up. In the weeks that followed, social media and professional forums erupted with personal stories. A well-known attorney recounted being mistaken for a nanny during a courtroom session in which she was the lead counsel simply because she was the only woman of color present. A respected surgeon shared how she was, regularly asked to clean patient rooms because no one could fathom that a young black woman could be a top trauma surgeon. A black entrepreneur detailed her heartbreak when guests in the press completely ignored her at her own company's launch event solely because no one believed that a woman of color could lead such a major project. These stories went viral at lightning speed, sparking a powerful tide of awareness and empathy across the country. Hashtags like #YourSpeakUp and Inspired by Olivia quickly trended, giving thousands of women, people of color, and anyone who'd ever been marginalized a platform to share their own experiences. Amid this groundswell of inspiration, the name Olivia Bennett naturally became a symbol, not because she sought fame, but because her resolute, genuine actions encouraged so many to find their own voices. She received countless thank you letters, often just a few lines, but overflowing with emotion. One young law student wrote, "Because of you, I spoke up in class today when a professor dismissed my perspective. I won't stay silent anymore. Thank you for giving me strength." Messages like this made Olivia realize that her battle was no longer just hers. It had grown into a movement, empowering a community to speak out and demand change. Meanwhile, Thomas Walker's situation grew increasingly dire. Having lost his flight privileges and premium status, he now faced intense pressure both online and within his own company. His employer called an emergency meeting to assess the serious damage his actions had done to their reputation. For the first time, colleagues who once avoided conflict with him confronted him with sharp criticism, no longer cowed by his former power. Seated in that familiar conference room, Thomas scrambled to defend himself, arguing that the whole episode had been blown out of proportion and blaming the media. But every excuse only underscored his arrogance, irresponsibility, and stubbornness. His peers saw clearly that he still didn't grasp the real issue, and that he perceived himself as the victim. As a result, Thomas was placed on temporary suspension, and his company expanded its internal review of his conduct, examining his history of complaints and behavior. The authority and prestige he had cultivated for years began to crumble, revealing the true portrait of a man accustomed to using his privilege to push others around without regard for consequences. By contrast, Olivia's reputation only grew stronger. Major corporations across the U.S. reached out to invite her to serve as an advisor on projects to improve workplace culture and advance diversity. Tech giants like Apple, Microsoft, and Google all expressed interest in having her help design new training programs and internal processes to eliminate bias and discrimination. Though cautious about overcommitting, Olivia was moved by these genuine invitations. She chose to work selectively, prioritizing organizations that demonstrated a real commitment to internal change. By helping these influential companies transform, she knew she could help build a better future, one where people are judged and respected for their abilities and character, not their gender or skin color. In every meeting and consultation, Olivia emphasized one simple but profound truth. We cannot change society unless each of us first changes our own mindsets and actions. That message has become a powerful beacon of hope, inspiring thousands who face injustice every day to find the courage to speak up and affirm their own worth, just as Olivia Bennett did. Every story shared and every deep conversation taking place across the country is the clearest proof of the powerful impact Olivia Bennett ignited without even trying. But above all, Olivia knows the true meaning of what happened isn't that she became the center of attention. It's that her experience awakened belief, hope, and strength in so many others. People who once felt invisible, who thought they didn't belong where they truly deserved to be. A few weeks after that unforgettable incident, Olivia found herself on a familiar flight from New York back to Atlanta. As she sat quietly in first class, waiting for other passengers to board, her gaze landed on a little black girl at the cabin door, nervously clutching her mother's hand. The girl looked around, her face a mix of confusion and hesitation, wondering if she really belonged here. Meeting that look, Olivia suddenly recognized the same anxious eyes she'd once had as a child, stepping first into spaces everyone assumed were reserved for those with power and privilege. A wave of emotion washed over her as she recalled her own early days, having to prove her worth in every meeting, every project. Olivia understood deeply that it was precisely those doubtful looks, those prejudiced words, and those dismissive actions that forged her inner strength and steadfast dignity today. Without a moment's hesitation, Olivia offered the warmest, most genuine smile and met the girl's eyes with a look that said, "You belong here. You can go anywhere you choose." As the little girl caught that friendly gaze, the worry melted from her small face, replaced by a radiant, confident smile. She turned to her mother, whispered something excitedly, and together they walked into first class as effortlessly and confidently as if they'd never hesitated. Watching that moment, Olivia felt an overwhelming sense of relief and deep emotion. She realized that although her own challenges had never been easy, every struggle she'd faced had real value and profound meaning. It wasn't just that she'd reclaimed a seat on a plane. It was that she'd helped reclaim dignity and respect for countless others who'd felt forgotten, voiceless, and unworthy to stand up for themselves. Meanwhile, in a very different world, Thomas Walker continued to pay for his actions. Following the internal investigation at his company, he was stripped of his senior management role. His once rock-solid, influential career had been reduced to a tarnished, fading memory. Friends, colleagues, and former partners turned away, some fearful of reputational damage, others repelled by his toxic misuse of power. Thomas began to grasp a painful truth. Power and social standing offer no absolute shield against wrongdoing. He felt bitter realizing that his own arrogance and contempt for others had been his undoing. Whether or not he ever truly changed, he had paid a fitting price for his behavior, a harsh lesson he would remember forever. For Olivia, this episode was only one chapter in her life, but a crucial milestone on her ongoing journey toward justice and dignity. She knows societal change doesn't happen quickly or easily, but that doesn't mean she'll stop. Every small step, every moment, like today, lays the first bricks of a more equitable, humane future. As the plane took off, Olivia leaned back in her seat and gazed out at the vast sky beyond the window. She thought of every person who stayed silent in the face of injustice, convinced their voice didn't matter. She hoped that through her story, they would understand one simple but vital truth. Each of us has the right to be heard, to be respected, and to be treated fairly, worthy of the effort and dedication we bring. Olivia Bennett's story doesn't end here. It will continue to spread, to inspire anyone still searching for the courage to stand up and fight. And above all, it carries a powerful, unmistakable message. Dignity and self-respect are our greatest strengths, helping us overcome any challenge, no matter how daunting. As long as we believe in our own worth, that we deserve what we fought and strived for, each of us will find the place we're meant to be. Not just on a plane, but in the life we lead, the society we build, and the future we pursue. If this story has inspired you, please like the video, share to spread this meaningful message to more people, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for many more powerful stories. Thank you for watching. Always remember you belong wherever you choose to be.